You know, it just feels like there's a lot going on in the world. It's easy to feel uneasy right now. And one of the things that we can do that I think is very powerful is to add our energy to the mix. And so we can do that with the peace practice. So I'd like to just take one moment, take a breath, and just quickly go through the peace practice so we can focus in on that. Just take a breath and focus in on that peace that we wish to see and that we wish to be in the world. And in your mind, you can repeat these four things as I say them. First, I am the peace I wish to see. I know this peace for my family. I know this peace for my community. And my community knows this peace for the world. Take one last breath. Together we just say, so it is. Bring that peace to this world. Thank you. Let's hold on to that peace this whole week. So let's get to the matters at hand. The talk today, well, there's a theme of the month, and right now we're using the global themes from the Centers for Spiritual Living. And so the theme of this month is cultivating authenticity. And what it says as a description of that is to release patterns of thought, attitudes, and actions that act as barriers to us standing in our own personal truth and power. And so this month we're looking at the practices that help us to live out loud. And today we're looking at boundaries. The talk is called Bridges and Fences, and that's really here to just talk about boundaries. It's a good time for me because thinking of physical boundaries, we just put a contract in on a new home after a year and a half, which is great. And we were sitting in the home during the inspection part. The home is kind of built on a slope going down so that our neighbors behind us, they're not like on the same level that it slopes down. So looking out our window, we could kind of look out onto the rooftop and into their lower windows if we look down. And I was saying, you know, what we should do is we should just build a short, like wall planter, you know, a short brick wall or stone wall with a planter on top. So that way our view is straight out. It's not looking down into their homes, and their view is not looking up into our homes. And it reminded me of that great cliche, that phrase that you've probably heard: fences make good neighbors. The taller the fence, the gooder the neighbor. And that's about boundaries. That's really about boundaries. Now, I have to say at the beginning of this, I am a recovering people pleaser. Are there any other people pleasers in the group? I grew up in a family with no boundaries, or very bad boundaries, I should say, and I inherited a lot of those. In my family, I always felt wrong. I could never do enough, and there was always so much drama. So my way of coping with that was that I was going to become the good child, the good boy, the peacemaker. I wasn't going to make waves. I wanted to be liked by everybody and to solve the problems of the family. And I discovered that the reward for being the good child is the booby prize, because there really was no reward, except I always felt unseen and unheard, until I discovered Al-Anon, and I discovered this book, Codependent No More, by Melody Beatty, which really changed a lot of things in my life. because it talks about boundaries. The book is really about boundaries. And if you've read the book or if you've attended Al-Anon, you know about boundaries. Now, for me, it flares up every once in a while over the years. And usually I'll start to see the signs and I can nip it in the bud and get better at strengthening up my boundaries. And every time I do, I pull out my copy of Codependent No More and get strong. So let's just talk about boundaries for a second and why it's important to this whole theme this month, really, of being authentic and living out loud. What are boundaries? The short definition for boundaries, which was created by Nancy Levin in her book called Setting Boundaries Will Set You Free, she said, boundaries are a limit that you set to define what you will or will not do, or what you will or will not accept from others. That's pretty clear. Boundaries, in a physical sense, are walls or barriers that either keep things out or they keep things in. We're talking like on a personal level here, the things that you keep that help you express yourself in the things that make you feel open to be authentic. So when you have that moment in your life when you're realizing that you're having to manage other people, or you're having to manage situations, or in any way, if it feels depleting, usually that's the sign, that's a call that boundaries need to be set. So what happens in our lives without healthy boundaries? We feel bad, we feel unseen, we feel unheard, we feel underappreciated and undervalued. We might even feel underpaid. We can feel helpless. We can feel disrespected. We can feel unimportant or less important than other people. We can feel overwhelmed. We can feel powerless. We might even feel small. I mean, the bottom line is, if we feel diminished in any way, that's a sign that we need to set a boundary, either with someone else or with ourselves. So regarding boundaries and all of those things that I just said, the question is, how much pain are you willing to accept before you take action and create some boundaries? So if that's what life looks like without healthy boundaries, what does life look like with healthy boundaries? Well, you have clarity. If we're dealing with somebody who has healthy boundaries, we know how they want to be treated, and they communicate that very clearly to us. When we have healthy boundaries, we feel more energy. A lot of our energy that's going towards others and managing situations is suddenly available to us. When we have healthy boundaries, we feel happier because we're spending more time making ourselves happy than we are trying to fix situations. With healthy boundaries, we feel more authentic, because when we have strong, healthy boundaries, we can be more of who we truly are because we aren't afraid of being it. And also with healthy boundaries, life is just easier. I mean, have you been around somebody who has really healthy boundaries? It's really clear. It's really simple to be around them because you know what's accepted, what's not accepted, and life is easy. You know who the person is in my life that has the healthiest boundary? My cat. My cat, Joopy. He is incredibly clear in the way that animals oftentimes are, but he's even more so. If he doesn't want to be around anybody, he goes off by himself into a place that we can't find him. If he does want attention and to be pet, he comes and sits on our lap. If he wants to be fed, his food bowl is empty, he comes and sits at my feet while I'm here at the computer. If I don't notice him, he does this thing where he gets up on his hind legs, puts his front paws on my leg, and then he taps my leg with his front paw. How much clearer can somebody be? His boundary was, My bowl is empty. You need to fix it now. That's pretty good. He's got great boundaries. So when we think about our lives and healthy boundaries, what parts of our life need healthy boundaries? The short answer is all parts of our life. Now, clearly, there's physical boundaries. That's our bodies and our personal space. And material boundaries. That's like our home, our possessions, our money. Those are the two most obvious. And by the way, there are lots of laws about those particular two areas of life, so that when boundaries are broken or violated, there are lots of laws that can happen, and law enforcement, whatever. Those are very important boundaries to keep clear. But in addition to those, there's also our mental self needs boundaries. That's our own thoughts, ideas, opinions, and our feeling free to express those thoughts, ideas, and opinions. Our emotional self, those are our feelings and emotions, and feeling safe to express those. Our relationships, these are our interactions with others. That's a really important area to have boundaries. Those include our family, our intimate relationships, our friends, our coworkers, as well as kind of the world immediately around us. So that could mean drivers, other drivers on the road. It can mean people in stores. It can mean servers in restaurants. It could be the people next to you on the airplane, or more importantly, the people behind you in an airplane who have the 5-year-old kid who they let kick your seat. That's a good boundary to turn around and say, stop doing that, please. Anyway, so that's, the relationships, kind of important and to very broad. Also, our energy, and our time, that's another area in our life where we have to set boundaries. In fact, one author that I was reading when I was thinking about this talk, she said that time is the boundary that is most often broken by other people, our time. That means asking people to do things for free, calling people who call multiple times over and over with non-emergencies, or people who call or text at odd hours, like when you're sleeping or when you're at work, like expecting others to drop everything to help them, or always wanting help immediately and not respecting your time, etc. So that's an important area to set up our boundaries. And then finally, our spiritual self. This is knowing what you require for your spiritual health and vitality, and how you can get self-care in this area. This is a really important area right now that there's a lot of attention on this, where people in religions are looking at the religions and doing what they call deconstructing it, meaning looking at the tenets and the people in it and saying, is this true? Is this something that I want to believe? And that means creating boundaries of what you believe and don't believe, what you'll accept and not accept. And when you find a good, healthy community, spiritual community like this one, it feels like such a breath of fresh air, because we uplift each other. We don't make other people wrong. We uplift each other, which is wonderful. So very quickly, I'm just going to cover some of the things that I've learned over boundaries. I mean, I really have made a study of boundaries over the years, both from a professional sense, but also in a personal sense. And these are just some quick things that I found that I thought can help us with our theme of this month of living our authentic lives. And the first thing about boundaries that I want to say, and it's maybe the most important thing, is we teach others how to treat us. It's our responsibility to let others know our boundaries through our words, through our actions, and through how we treat ourselves. In Al-Anon, I learned something important, which is that we can be attentive to other people, but we don't have to be responsible for other people. We can help others, but we don't have to fix others. That's a really big distinction. And it's also, it freed, speaking for myself, it freed me up from feeling like I had to take responsibility for other adults. We're not talking kids, of course, we're responsible for our kids, talking adults. Um, I also learned that helping others should not feel like it's hurting myself. So helping others in a way that was hurting me was showing me that I needed to create a boundary. It's good to remember too, when we're talking about boundaries and other people, that other people cannot read our minds. We need to actually communicate our boundaries clearly and consistently. It's a real red flag for me as a friend, or even when I've done pastoral counseling, and you probably can relate to this. It's a real red flag for me when somebody says to me, I shouldn't have to tell you, you should know this is not the way that blah, blah, blah. Well, we should never assume someone knows what you're thinking or what you need or don't want. We should never assume that other people know what our boundaries are. We should communicate them clearly and consistently. It's also good to remember that healthy boundaries are about ourselves. They're not about other people. The other person might be the catalyst or the effect, and that means that we can use them as mirrors to where we need to work on strengthening our own boundaries. So if we find ourselves using language like, you make me feel this way, or you blank, 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 what we're really saying is, you are showing me an area in my life I need to get clear about. And also, respect goes both ways. If I want others to respect my boundaries, I need to respect their boundaries as well. Even if I don't like their boundaries, I need to respect them. There's a phrase that we often say, which is stay in your own lane. That's good advice for a reason. Now, the second thing I've learned is that boundaries are for ourselves as well. They're not just about other people, they're really for ourselves. I have a high value on helping other people, but I need to remember that I'm one of those people that I need to help. It's so easy to just want to help other people and then forget that you yourself are the person that often needs your own help. Our thoughts, words, and actions need to enhance our own lives. So to live the life that we want to have, we need to set internal boundaries to make that happen. For instance, if we hate going to work in the morning and tired, and we get to work and we're not alert and it takes us forever to kind of catch up, and it's like, oh, this feels so early and I hate this. But at the same time, we're also staying up late until 1 or 2 o'clock each night, or we're drinking a second, third, fourth glass of wine right before bed, or we're scrolling through TikTok for hours on end. Maybe we need to set some boundaries for ourselves so that we can then have a different experience when we go to work the next morning. If we find ourselves complaining to others or complaining to ourselves about other people, like our partners or our family members or another friend or our boss or our coworker, that's a sign that we need to set up and keep a boundary with them, even if it's difficult to do. Another thing I've learned is that setting boundaries may require some changes. There is nothing worse than that person in our life who complains about their significant other, their family member, their sibling, their job, their mother for years, and they don't make any substantive changes, right? What it may require is making some new rules in relationships. So we don't want to be that person who complains forever about something. We want to be able to set a boundary to make positive changes so that we don't have anything to complain about. It might require, like I said, some new rules in relationships. It also might require gently allowing some people to leave your life. Now, what that means is spending less time with them, maybe calling them less, or seeing them less, or in some other cases, it might even be a little bit more drastic and not having any communication with them. Do you guys remember the old teacher in New Thought, Terry Cole Whitaker? She was great, and she used to say, that you should take your address book. Back when we used to have address books, and now everything, of course, is right on our phone. But back when we had address books, for those of us who can remember, she said, "You get rid of your old address book and get a new one and write right on the front of it, by invitation only." That means only put the people in your life that lift you up, that are there for positive reasons. We might need to move the others, like I said, a little further out, or a lot out, or maybe even completely. Setting boundaries, like I said, may require some changes, and that change may also be a new job. When people chronically complain about their work, either they really like just complaining, in which case Raymond Charles Barker says these are people who are happy in their unhappiness, or it might be a sign that it's time for them to get a new job, and that might be us. So if you find yourself continually complaining, set a boundary by either changing the conditions at work or finding something new. The next thing is, here's the easiest way to set boundaries in your life, in one word: no. That's a boundary. There's a phrase that's going around, everybody loves it right now. It's no is a complete sentence. And it's true. I mean, it can be a little more complicated than that, but in essence, no is a complete sentence. So is the word yes. So I had this best friend, she's passed on now, but she was a therapist, and we were best friends for years, and we became practitioners together, actually, back in the 1990s. And she used to always say this. She would say, when you say no to something, you are actually saying yes to something else. And vice versa, when you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. So when somebody asks you to do something and you say yes to it when you don't want to, what you're really doing is you're saying yes to them, but you're saying no to what makes you happy, or to what you want to do, or anything, no to something that brings you joy. On the other hand, when you say no to somebody, when somebody asks you to do something that you don't want to do and you say no to it, what you're doing is you're saying yes to yourself. You're saying yes to honoring your own time, your own life, and the things that bring you joy. So remember that every time you're asked to do something, that if you say yes to it, you're saying no to something else. But if you say no to it, you're saying yes to something else. And one other thing about this point, this comes from an author named Henry Cloud, who wrote a book on boundaries called Boundaries. It's not my favorite book on boundaries, but there's one line in there that I really loved. And he says in that book, he says, we must feel fully free to say no in order to feel that we can wholeheartedly say yes. Because if I say no out of obligation, I'm not really there, and I don't feel good about it, and it's not going to have the right energy. If I ask somebody for something and they say no, I respect it. And if they say yes, I want them to say yes wholeheartedly. So we have to have that own freedom, and that comes through boundaries. Just a couple more. One is, what if someone is upset or hurt by our boundaries? Now, as a recovering people pleaser, this was a big one for me to examine and to look at. And, being criticized or having people get angry at us because of a boundary we have might not feel good. And so it's important to have a strategy in mind when you create your boundary, if it does upset or hurt someone else. So the first thing you do, if you create a boundary and it upsets somebody else, the first thing to do is really to just evaluate the boundary. Is your boundary meant to help you, or is it there to punish someone else? Because remember, we've talked earlier in this talk, I mentioned that boundaries are not there about other people. They're just the mirror showing us where we need boundaries. The boundaries are really for us. So if your boundary is there to punish someone else, maybe you need to reevaluate it. If you do set a healthy boundary and it still hurts other people, then you can do one of two things. One, You can either stand firm with the boundary, or two, you can negotiate the boundary. So that usually comes in with when you're living with somebody, either an intimate partner, boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse, that type of thing, or a roommate. And roommate stuff comes up. I hate it when you leave your dishes out on the counter. I would like to, my new healthy boundary is that nobody ever leaves dishes on the boundary, on the counter. And if the roommate or the other person living with you has a problem with that, or feels targeted or hurt by the way you've communicated it, then you can sit down and negotiate and say, this is why I don't like it. And they can say, how they feel, and you can come together with another healthy boundary. So you're melding your two boundaries together in a healthy way. And finally, the last thing I'll say about boundaries is this. Boundaries can take courage to have. It can be hard to have boundaries and to communicate them clearly and consistently, to enforce them and to live by them. But when we do, boy, life does feel freer, and it also is better on many levels. I recently had an experience where with a boundary, and it did take courage. I was at a doctor's office, a new doctor, and for a particular situation, and the doctor came in and she immediately made a statement about my situation, an assumption, without even asking a question first. So I thought, okay, let me ask her some questions. So I asked some questions. I didn't feel like she was listening to the question. I felt like she was just answering with stock answers, instead of hearing what I was actually asking. And I tried to communicate it a little further, and I kept feeling like I wasn't being heard. And it felt really diminishing. And I really worried about saying something, because this was a person in power and they would determine, certain things that could help my life or not. So I started feeling upset, and I thought, I could either walk out of this office feeling frustrated and unseen and unheard, or I could say something. So I stepped out in courage and I said, let me just say this. I feel like I'm getting upset because I feel like you have already decided something about me. And we've just started. This is our first visit together. And I keep trying to communicate things that I feel like I'm not being heard. Would you please listen to what I'm saying? Oh, the other thing she was doing is, instead of talking, every time we'd say anything, she would type it into the computer. So she wasn't even looking at me over there. I would say something and she would type it, and then she would type her answer. Anyway, I said, so would you please just look at me, listen to what I'm saying, and ask maybe answer what I'm asking instead of what you think I'm asking. So she did. She stopped and she just, yes. And so I would ask, and she did answer. We kind of got to a different place, but I left and I thought, first of all, I felt very happy that I stood up for myself. And two, I decided to set another new boundary. And that new boundary was, I'm going to get another doctor, which I did. And I had a much different and better experience. But it took courage. So creating boundaries, then communicating them, and then enforcing them can be really, really difficult. And yet, I felt so much better, and I'm getting better care as a result of it. So that's just a good example. So let me say this in closing. Epictetus, the famous Stoic philosopher, said this. He said, the more we value things outside of our control, the less control we have. Boundaries help us to have control over what we can have control over. When we open ourselves up to living authentically who we are as much as possible, and we free up others to do the same, then we are living with healthy boundaries. And after all, Ernest Holmes, the founder of our Science of Mind philosophy, said this. He said, you rob no other person when you discover your own good. You limit no other person when you express a greater degree of your own livingness, and you hinder no other person's evolution when you consciously enter into the kingdom of your own good and possess it today. That is healthy boundary living. So let's take this into treatment and let's affirm it for ourselves. And let's just go to that place where we can take a deep breath and we can just feel the experience of the divine, that thing, Ernest Holmes, that is greater than us, that energy, that life, that breath of life that breathes itself through each one of us. And as we connect with that, we realize that we can live authentically for who we are. We don't have to prevent others by being who they are so that we might feel good in who we are. We can just live it. We can create our own boundaries for others and for ourselves so that we can express ourselves in healthy ways, and we do so now. And so that we can live our life authentically, and we choose that for ourselves right now. As we live and breathe and become clearer and clearer of who we are, we automatically allow others to see that as well, so that we are clear and consistent in our own authentic being. And that great breath of life that breathes itself through us can now breathe even deeper, and we can experience it in greater and ever greater ways. This is the gift of life. This is the gift of healthy boundaries, and we choose them right here, right now, in our lives today. We're so grateful to know it. We release this into law, and together we say, and so it is.